Have you ever scrolled through someone's feed and thought, there's no way they're actually like this in real life? That performative joy, those carefully curated moments of spontaneity, the personality that feels just a little too polished? You're not imagining it. There's a specific psychology behind people who construct entirely different versions of themselves online. Not just highlighting their best moments, but fundamentally altering who they are, creating a character they perform daily. This isn't about occasionally posting flattering photos or sharing achievements. This is about systematic personality fabrication, the construction of a false self so elaborate that the person behind it starts to lose track of who they actually are. Social media didn't invent fake personalities, but it perfected the infrastructure for them. It created stages where performance became mandatory, where authenticity was commodified, where the gap between real and performed self could stretch infinitely wide. And the people who do this aren't necessarily narcissists or con artists. Many are deeply insecure individuals who discovered that a fabricated personality gets more love than the real one ever did. The typical trajectory starts innocently enough. Someone posts a slightly exaggerated version of an experience. The response is overwhelmingly positive. Dopamine floods their system. The lesson is learned. Performance pays. They begin crafting their content more carefully, testing which personality traits generate engagement, discovering that extroverted humor gets more likes than their natural introversion, that inspirational wisdom attracts followers faster than honest confusion. Over time, they develop an entire alternate personality architecture. They become funny when they're naturally serious, adventurous when they prefer routine, confident when they're riddled with self-doubt. The fascinating part is how quickly this fabricated self becomes reinforced. Every like, comment, and share validates the performance. The algorithm rewards consistency. The audience expects the character to remain in character. Psychologically, this creates a feedback loop called behavioral confirmation. When people respond to your fake personality as if it's real, your brain starts treating it as real. The boundary between performance and identity begins dissolving. I remember watching someone I knew transform entirely online over 6 months. In person, they were quiet and thoughtful. Online, they became this aggressive motivational speaker personality, shouting about hustle culture and morning routines they definitely didn't follow. What struck me wasn't the performance itself, but how exhausted they looked in real life. Like they were carrying the weight of maintaining two complete identities, the person they were and the person they pretended to be. This exhaustion is central to understanding fake personality syndrome. Maintaining a fabricated self requires constant cognitive labor. Every post must be filtered through the character, every interaction calculated for consistency. Psychologists call this impression management, but in chronic cases, it escalates into something closer to identity fragmentation. The real self doesn't disappear, it just gets buried under layers of performance until it suffocates. You might be wondering why someone would choose this. Why not just be authentic? The answer is devastatingly simple, because authenticity often doesn't work on social media. Platforms are designed to reward engagement, not truth. A carefully constructed personality optimized for virality will always outperform genuine complexity. Algorithms can't measure depth, only clicks. So people adapt. They study what works. They notice that vulnerability performs well, but only specific types of vulnerability. Relatable struggles, not actual darkness. Inspiring resilience, not genuine despair. They learn to perform authenticity itself, to create content that feels raw and real while being meticulously scripted, the confession that took 47 takes, the spontaneous moment that was carefully staged. This is where it gets psychologically dangerous, because performative authenticity is more insidious than obvious fakeness. It tricks both the audience and the performer into believing the act is real. The people most vulnerable to this pattern often have specific psychological profiles. They typically struggled with identity formation during adolescence, never quite figured out who they were supposed to be. Social media offered them something revolutionary, the ability to choose their identity rather than discover it, to construct rather than uncover, to perform rather than become. For someone who spent their youth feeling invisible or inadequate, the power to reinvent yourself online is intoxicating. Finally, they can be the person they always wished they were. Except they're not becoming that person. They're performing them. There's a crucial difference between growth and fabrication, between evolution and costume. The psychological cost accumulates gradually. At first, it feels empowering. Look how many people love this version of me. Look how interesting I've become. But eventually, a specific kind of loneliness sets in. The loneliness of being celebrated for someone you're not, of having thousands of followers who don't actually know you, of being famous for a character you play. This is compounded by the fact that real relationships require authenticity. When you meet people in real life who know you from online, you have to maintain the act. The performance becomes inescapable. I've seen people develop genuine anxiety about being recognized in public, not because they're famous, but because they can't maintain their online personality in real time. The mask requires editing and careful curation. There's also the phenomenon of audience capture. This happens when your audience's expectations start controlling your personality development. You become trapped by what they want you to be. If you built your following by being funny, you can't suddenly be serious. If you presented yourself as having it all together, you can't admit to struggling. The audience owns your character now. This creates a bizarre psychological prison. You constructed the personality to gain freedom and validation, but it ends up limiting you more than your original self ever did. What makes this particularly tragic is that the fabricated personality often contains elements of who the person wishes they could be, traits they admire but don't naturally possess. So they're not just performing a random character, they're performing their idealized self, which makes it even harder to abandon, because giving up the fake personality feels like giving up on their potential. Psychologically, this connects to a concept called the ideal self gap, the distance between who you are and who you think you should be. Social media allows people to close that gap virtually while widening it actually. Every day they perform confidence online is a day they reinforce their real-life insecurity. Every post celebrating their fake extroversion highlights their authentic introversion. The gap expands. Research on identity development shows that authentic self-construction requires trial and error in real relationships. You test different aspects of yourself in genuine interactions and keep what resonates. But social media short-circuits this process. Instead of discovering yourself through authentic connection, you invent yourself through audience response. The validation is faster but completely hollow. There's a specific moment many people describe experiencing, the moment they can't remember who they really are anymore. The lines have blurred so completely that the performance and the person have merged into something unrecognizable. This isn't metaphorical. Neurologically, repeated behaviors create neural pathways. If you perform a personality long enough, your brain starts treating those patterns as default. The fake becomes foundational. Some people reach this point and experience something like an identity crisis. They'll be in a private moment, no cameras, no audience, and realize they don't know how to act. Who are they when no one's watching? Others never reach this awareness. They become so integrated with the performance that they genuinely believe it is them. The fabrication becomes their reality. They've gaslit themselves into accepting the character as truth. The relationship dynamics become particularly complicated. How do you form genuine connections when you're performing a character? How do you know if people actually like you? Many people caught in this pattern develop two sets of relationships: online connections who love the fabricated personality, and real-life relationships where they feel increasingly alien and misunderstood. The real-life relationships suffer because the person has invested so much energy into the performance that they have nothing left for authentic connection. They're depleted from maintaining the act. Meanwhile, the online relationships feel more rewarding because they're based on the idealized self. The person receives constant validation for being someone they're not, which is more intoxicating than occasional acceptance for who they are. There's also the financial and professional angle. For some people, the fake personality becomes their brand. Their income depends on maintaining the character. This creates an impossible situation. They can't afford to be authentic, literally. Their mortgage depends on performing the personality that generates engagement. the fabrication becomes economically essential. I've watched influencers try to show more of their real selves and immediately lose followers. The audience doesn't want truth, they want the character. They've subscribed to a performance, not a person. This economic pressure transforms personality fabrication from a psychological issue into a survival strategy. Authenticity becomes a luxury they can't afford. The long-term psychological consequences are significant. Studies on identity development show that people who don't establish authentic identities in early adulthood struggle with meaning and purpose later in life. When your entire sense of self is constructed through external validation, you have no internal anchor, no core identity to return to during crisis, no authentic self to fall back on. This makes people increasingly dependent on social media validation. They need the constant reinforcement to maintain their sense of self. Without it, they experience something close to existential terror. The notifications aren't just nice, they're necessary. Each like confirms that the fabricated self still exists. Each comment proves that the character is still believable. The engagement becomes life support for a false identity. What's particularly insidious is how this pattern can affect entire generations. When personality fabrication becomes normalized, young people start believing it's how identity works. They see influencers with millions of followers performing elaborate personalities and think that's what success looks like. That you're supposed to construct a marketable self rather than discover an authentic one. This creates a culture where authenticity is seen as naive or unmarketable, where being real is considered boring, where complexity and contradiction are weaknesses rather than human truth. And the message becomes, figure out what people want and become that. Your actual personality isn't relevant. What matters is the personality that performs best. So, what's the way out? How does someone trapped in a fabricated personality find their way back to authenticity? The first step is recognizing the gap, acknowledging that the performed self and the actual self have diverged. This requires brutal honesty and is often terrifying. Many people resist this awareness because it means admitting that the validation they received isn't really for them, that the love directed at their online persona doesn't count, that they've been praised for being someone they're not. This realization can feel like grief, like they have to mourn both the fake self they constructed and the authentic self they abandoned. It's a double loss. The process of reclaiming authentic identity often requires stepping back from social media entirely, creating space where performance isn't required, where you can exist without audience. This is incredibly difficult for people whose income or social life depends on their online presence. They can't just disappear. The fabricated personality has become structurally necessary. Some people attempt a gradual transition, slowly showing more of their real selves, testing whether their audience can handle authenticity. Most discover that some followers leave, but the ones who stay become more meaningful. Others make a clean break, abandon the performed personality entirely, and start over. This requires accepting significant losses, followers, income, social status, but it offers something invaluable: coherence. There's also the question of whether complete authenticity is even possible online. Every platform requires some level of curation and presentation. Where's the line between reasonable self-presentation and fabrication? The distinction lies in intention and degree. Highlighting your best moments while remaining fundamentally yourself is different from constructing an entirely alternate personality. Authenticity doesn't mean sharing everything or being raw all the time. It means that what you do share reflects who you actually are. That your online presence is a selective but honest representation, not a fictional character. The key is maintaining internal coherence. If you can't recognize yourself in what you post, if you'd be mortified for real friends to see your content, if you perform traits you don't possess, you've crossed into fabrication. For people trying to rebuild authentic identity, real-world relationships become essential. You need people who know you without the filter, who can reflect back your actual personality. These relationships are uncomfortable at first for people used to performing. There's no editing in real conversation, no time to craft the perfect response. You have to exist as yourself in real time. But this discomfort is where growth happens, where you rediscover who you are beneath the performance, where you learn that your authentic self, messy and imperfect, is worthy of connection. Many people discover that they're actually more interesting than the character they created, that their real complexity, contradictions, and depth are more compelling than any performed simplicity. There's also the process of grieving the fabricated self. Even though it was fake, it represented hope. The hope that you could become someone worthy of love. Letting it go means accepting yourself as you are. This acceptance is the real work. Not performing confidence, but developing actual self-worth. Not pretending to be interesting, but becoming genuinely engaged with your own life. It means pursuing interest because you're curious, not because they make good content. Developing relationships because they're meaningful, not because they look impressive. Living for yourself, not for the feed. The irony is that authentic people often end up more successful on social media in the long run. Audiences can sense genuine personality. They're hungry for it amid all the performance. But this success has to be secondary. If you're being authentic to get better engagement, you're still performing. You're just performing authenticity, which is arguably worse. The goal is to reach a place where social media becomes optional, where you engage with it from a place of wholeness rather than need, where you can take it or leave it without experiencing identity crisis. This requires developing a strong sense of self, independent of external validation. Knowing who you are, regardless of likes, comments, or followers. Being okay with being unknown. For many people, this is the hardest part. Our culture has equated visibility with value. Being unknown feels like being worthless. But obscurity can be freedom. The ultimate question isn't whether to be on social media, but whether you're using it or it's using you. Whether you control your online presence or it controls your sense of self. People who fake their personality for social media aren't fundamentally different from anyone else. They just took the platform's implicit instructions to their logical extreme. They optimize for engagement at the cost of identity. The vulnerability factors are universal. We all want to be liked. We all want validation. We all want to present our best selves. The difference is just how far we're willing to go. Some people maintain healthy boundaries. They curate without fabricating. They present without performing. They use social media as a tool rather than becoming tools of social media. Others cross the line without realizing it. One exaggerated post leads to another. One performed trait becomes 2, then 10. Before they know it, they're maintaining an entire fictional identity. The tragedy is that the validation they receive, though real, is misdirected. Thousands of people might love them, but they're loving someone who doesn't exist. The real person remains invisible and unloved. This is why the loneliness of fake personalities is so profound. You can be surrounded by admirers and still feel completely alone, because none of them know you. They know your character. The path back to authenticity requires courage. It means risking rejection, losing followers, disappointing people who loved the character. It means being willing to be small, unknown, and unimpressive. It means accepting that your real personality might not go viral, that your genuine self might attract fewer likes, that authenticity might not be rewarded by the algorithm. But it also means being real, being coherent, being the same person alone as you are online. And that coherence, that integration, that wholeness, that's what actually feels like freedom. Because when you're authentic, every connection you make is real. Every person who likes you actually likes you. Every follower is following the person you actually are. There's no anxiety about being discovered. No exhaustion from maintaining the performance. No split between your public and private selves. Just one integrated identity. This doesn't mean you have to share everything. Privacy and authenticity aren't opposites. You can be selectively private while remaining fundamentally honest about who you are. The question to ask yourself is simple. If someone spent time with you in real life, would they recognize the person from your online presence? Would your digital self and your actual self align? If the answer is no, if there's a significant gap, then you're performing rather than presenting. You're fabricating rather than highlighting. You're playing a character rather than being yourself. And that fabrication, no matter how successful it becomes, will never satisfy the deep human need to be known and loved for who you actually are. Social media promises connection but often delivers performance. It promised authenticity but rewarded fabrication. It promised community but created audiences. The challenge is to use these platforms without being used by them, to maintain your authentic identity in spaces designed to commodify personality, to be real in a world that rewards performance. This is one of the defining psychological challenges of our time. How do we maintain coherent identities in an age of infinite self-presentation? How do we stay real when reality doesn't trend? The answer isn't to abandon social media entirely, though that's valid for some people. The answer is to use it consciously, to engage from wholeness, to post from authenticity rather than need, to remember that your value isn't determined by engagement metrics, that your worth existed before social media and will exist after it, that being unknown and real is better than being famous and fake. That's what actually resembles peace.